Tonight, we explore the mythic tale of Arion, the forgotten son of Hephaestus, a demigod born not of Olympus, but of fire and steel, deep in the forge of a mortal blacksmith. His task? Steal the eternal flame from Mount Olympus itself, to reignite the dying hearths of humanity. But what stood in his way was no simple quest. A three-headed guardian of the underworld, a jealous god in winged sandals, and a storm-summoning oracle who foresaw only one ending, Arion's death. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you enjoy the kind of content that merges myth and mystery. And hey, let us know. Where are you watching from? What time is it for you right now? Sometimes our stories are better than sleep, and other times, they just make you dream louder. It's time now to dim the lights, turn on a fan for some noise, and let's cover what we have for tonight, together. In the flickering forge of Mycenae, where men shaped iron with sweat and prayer, there lived a woman whose hands rivaled the gods. Her name was Callista, a mortal blacksmith with fire in her soul and a hammer that sang when it struck bronze. She built swords that could split spears in mid-air and armour so seamless it was whispered that Ares himself once wore her breastplates into battle. The gods noticed, but only one descended. Hephaestus, the lame god of the forge, the outcast of Olympus, watched her in silence. He was not drawn by beauty. Callista was not a woman of perfumes or palace gowns. She wore soot like war paint and smelled of iron and pine smoke. But when she worked, Hephaestus saw something divine in her movements, something familiar. One night, as the moon hung low and red over the Aegean, Hephaestus entered her workshop cloaked in smoke and shadow. He offered no gifts, no divine decree, only his presence. The forge flared brighter that night, and 9 months later, a child was born. Arion. He did not cry, not at first. His eyes opened and glowed like coals, and the fire in the forge leapt as if recognizing its kin. The midwives gasped. One whispered, "He's touched by the divine." Another crossed herself, and the oldest among them muttered, "He's not meant to stay here long." Arion grew faster than other boys. At 5, he could shape iron. At 7, he forged his first blade, flawless, sharp, and oddly warm to the touch. He never played. He never lied. There was a stillness in him that made others uneasy. The village feared what they did not understand. They called him cursed, the son of a god who had no throne. Children avoided him. Priests refused to bless him. But Callista? She loved him fiercely, teaching him not just to work with fire, but to respect it. "Flame obeys those who listen," she'd say, "not those who command." By the time he turned 16, Arion's forge burned day and night, shaping weapons for cities he'd never seen and kings he'd never meet. But even as metal flowed beneath his hands, something deeper stirred within him. He wasn't made to serve. He was made to change the world. Long ago, the eternal flame had been a gift, stolen from the heavens, defied into existence by Prometheus himself. It was fire not just for warmth, but for thought, art, creation. It was what set man apart from beast. But that age of defiance had dimmed. Humanity no longer remembered the debt it owed the gods, and the gods in turn had turned their backs on mankind. It began slowly. Hearths that once glowed without fail began to flicker out. Forests grew colder. Storms stretched longer. Crops wilted in spring, and homes were filled with the breath of frost, even in high summer. Children shivered beside unlit chimneys. Old women murmured prayers into ashes that gave no heat. Priests spoke of punishment. Scholars blamed the stars. But across villages, towns, and empires, a different fear took root. Not that the world was ending, but that the gods had abandoned them. And they were right. High atop Mount Olympus, the gods had sealed away the last true flame, a spark kept alive only in the divine brazier, untouched by mortal hand for centuries. No god dared share it again. They feared man's rebellion, feared what Prometheus had begun. They told themselves, let them suffer. They must remember their place. But not all gods agreed. In hidden corners of the world, whispers stirred. Dryads spoke of a boy born of flame. Nymphs saw sparks dancing in a boy's eyes from Mycenae. The winds carried a name, Irion. In the cold chambers of Delphi, the oracle dreamed of fire, walking on two legs, lighting cities with its footsteps. And in the depths of forgotten temples, dying candles sputtered back to life at the sound of a blacksmith's hammer striking anvil. Irion had no idea. He only knew the iron was growing harder to shape, that the flames in his forge required more breath, that the warmth that once came easily was slipping away. But the world had begun to watch. Gods both old and silent had turned their gaze to Mycenae. The divine brazier atop Olympus, though shielded in marble and guarded by fate, flickered for the first time in an age, responding not to a god, but to a boy born of fire and sorrow. And deep within him, something began to glow. Delphi was dying. Once the centre of divine council, where kings and warriors climbed stone paths to seek Apollo's voice, now it stood quiet, its columns cracked and overgrown, its sacred springs reduced to mist. But one voice still lingered, buried deep within the mountain's breath. The oracle. Irion arrived in silence. No one greeted him at the gates. The torches lining the temple had long since gone out. Ivy clung to broken altars like fingers, unwilling to let go of lost faith. Thunder growled in the clouds above, not of rain, but of something older. Watching. He descended into the hollow chamber where generations before him had once wept and begged. There, seated atop a crumbling stone throne, was the oracle. She was draped in violet robes, skin pale like ash, eyes blind but blazing with storms. Before he could speak, she inhaled sharply, like a flame being pulled back into a lantern. "Irion," she hissed, though no name had been spoken. He said nothing. "You will climb the mountain. You will take the flame. And you will die." Her voice cracked like a whip through the stillness. He didn't flinch. He had heard stories of oracles, their riddles wrapped in poetry and metaphor. But this wasn't a prophecy. It was a sentence. She rose slowly, limbs moving like smoke caught in wind. "The gods will oppose you. The world will demand your failure. The flame, what you seek, it does not belong to mortals. It was stolen once, and the price was eternity in chains." Irion stepped forward, fists clenched. "So let me pay the price." A long silence followed. Then, laughter, not cruel but tired, the sound of someone who had seen too many stories end the same way. "You already are," she whispered. The room grew dark. The thunder outside crescendoed. The air pulsed with something old, something primal. Then, just as suddenly, everything went still. The oracle slumped back into her seat. Her mouth opened, but only smoke escaped. Her prophecy was done. And though Irion left without another word, her vision followed him. In dreams. In flame. In every shadow cast by his forge. The gods had spoken. His path was set. But not even Olympus could predict what a dying world would do when handed back its fire. Before one could ascend Olympus, one had to earn the mountain's recognition. And Olympus never bowed to the untested. Legends whispered that the base of the mountain was not stone or snow, but soul. That beneath its foundation was a gate, sealed by silence and guarded by the oldest fear in creation, Cerberus, the hound of Hades. No one could pass that gate without first touching death. Irion did not question it. He had studied myths the way blacksmiths study heat, closely, warily. He knew what waited beneath the roots of Olympus. But to reach the eternal flame, he would have to descend, not metaphorically, but into the very underworld itself. So he prepared not with armour, but with craft. He spent 3 days and 3 nights forging a collar, not for battle, but for submission. It was made of obsidian, iron, and the final ember from his mother's forge. Into it he carved 3 names, one for each of Cerberus's heads. He whispered them aloud as he worked: memory, loyalty, grief. On the 4th day, he stood before the shadowed mouth of a cave said to lead downward forever. The wind here was cold, but it did not sting the skin. It scraped the soul, and the air smelled not of rot, but of forgotten prayers. He entered. Deeper and deeper he walked, past bones that glowed faintly in the dark, past torches that lit themselves without flame, until he heard it, the breathing, slow, massive, layered, like 3 storms dreaming in unison. Cerberus. He stepped into the clearing and found the beast sleeping on a bed of ash and bone, each head twitching in a different rhythm. Its fur was blacker than absence. Its eyes were closed, but its ears twitched. Arion did not draw a weapon. He approached, knelt, and held out the collar. Then, softly, he began to hum. It was the song his mother had sung to him as a child, the one she sang when night made the world feel too big, too cruel. The middle head stirred. The left opened one amber eye. The right snarled, then stopped. They listened. And in that silence, Arion slipped the collar on. Cerberus exhaled, and the door behind him opened, not with rage, but with respect. Arion had touched death, and death had stepped aside. The road up Olympus was no road at all. There were no markers, no stars to guide the way, only sheer rock, biting wind, and whispers that echoed from nowhere. Arion climbed not with certainty, but with instinct. His mortal hands bled. His divine blood burned. The mountain resisted him at every turn. And then he appeared, not with a roar, not in a flash of power, but in silence. Hermes, the trickster, the messenger, the thief. He stood on a ledge ahead, dressed like a traveller, cloak loose, sandals laced with feathers, eyes sharp as broken glass. A crooked grin danced across his lips. "Well," he said, spinning a coin between his fingers, "I thought you'd be taller." Arion didn't stop climbing. "I know why you're here," Hermes continued, walking casually beside him without ever lifting a foot. "You want to bring fire back to the mortals. Sweet, noble, stupid." Arion paused. "Then stop me." Hermes chuckled. "Stop you? Oh no. I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to make sure you understand the deal. You're walking into the heart of Olympus, into the gods' vault, into a story that isn't yours to tell. And yet," Arion replied, "here I am." That smile faded slightly. "You're trying to restore a balance that was broken for a reason," Hermes said. "The flame was a gift, once, a mistake, and now the gods guard it like a dragon guards gold. Not because it's precious, but because it's dangerous." Arion stared at him. Then they've forgotten what danger looks like. For the first time, Hermes' expression soured. The air around them shifted. The coin in his hand vanished. His wings twitched. "You think you're Prometheus," he said, voice cold. "But you're not even a flicker compared to him." "I'm not trying to be him," Arion answered. "I'm trying to finish what he started." Hermes stepped forward, pressed 2 fingers to Arion's chest. "Then here's my gift." Pain surged. It wasn't physical. It was deeper. A thread inside him twisted, turned. "The fire you seek," Hermes whispered, "will burn everything you are." Then he vanished. The mountain groaned. Thunder rolled. A storm had begun, not of rain, but of consequence. And Arion climbed higher, cursed, but unshaken. The curse settled into Arion's chest like frost in the lungs. At first, it was subtle, a tightening when he breathed, a dull heat beneath his skin. But the higher he climbed, the more it bit into him. Not like a wound, more like erosion. Piece by piece, the man was being scraped away, leaving something raw behind. Mount Olympus was no longer just a mountain. It was alive. Its cliffs shifted beneath his feet. Wind screamed down ravines like ancient voices furious to be disturbed. The higher he rose, the less mortal the world became. Trees stopped growing. Birds stopped singing. Even the stars above seemed to pull back. There were no paths. Only jagged ledges and sheer faces that demanded sacrifice with each step. Irian bled. He slipped. Once, he nearly fell to his death, but a sudden flash of heat from within his chest steadied him. It was as if the flame Hermes spoke of, the one that would burn him, had begun to awaken. But he kept climbing, because every time he faltered, he thought of the dying hearths, the cold villages, the children huddled in darkness. He thought of his mother, hands blistered, still forging warmth for a world forgetting what warmth meant. And still, Olympus offered no mercy. Storm clouds gathered above. Lightning danced along the ridge like gods pacing in frustration. He could feel their eyes now, watching, judging, waiting for him to fall. But it wasn't just the mountain fighting him. It was Olympus itself. He passed ancient ruins carved into the stone, temples long abandoned by faith, their altars cracked, their gods forgotten. Statues of Athena with eyes chipped out, columns of Zeus split by time and silence. Irian realized something no one else had dared to say aloud. The gods weren't powerful anymore. They were afraid that a mortal might bring the fire back without their permission, that someone not born in their halls might carry the light that once defined Olympus, and in that fear they threw their worst at him. Ice, thunder, visions, voices, but he climbed. With hands torn and heart smouldering, he rose above the clouds, and in the distance, lit not by sun, but by divine flame. He saw it, the brazier, burning, waiting. It was not what he expected. The summit of Olympus wasn't carved in marble or guarded by gods clad in gold. There were no trumpets, no gates, no thunderclaps of divine welcome. There was only silence, and the flame. It stood in the centre of a windless clearing, on a pedestal of blackened stone. The brazier looked ancient, older than language itself, shaped by hands no longer remembered, and inside it danced the eternal flame, not red, not orange, but white, pure, blinding, alive. It did not flicker. It watched. Irian stepped closer. The heat didn't sear him. It entered him, as if recognizing something long lost. His breath caught. His skin prickled. That ember Hermes had cursed into his heart now pulsed like a second heartbeat, calling to the flame like a lost sibling. He reached out. In that moment, time faltered. He saw cities built from firelight. He saw his mother's forge blazing in the dead of winter. He saw civilizations rising and falling, each one built around fire, and each one forgetting why it burned. He also saw the punishment. Prometheus, chained to stone, his liver eaten daily by a vulture. The gods had called it justice. But Irian saw it for what it was, fear wearing a crown. He could turn back. He could let humanity adapt to the cold, forget fire, forget him. But then he heard the wind whisper her name, Callista, and he remembered who he was. He grabbed the flame, and it took him. Pain screamed through his body, not like burning, like being rewritten. Bones cracked and reformed. His skin glowed, veins pulsing with light. He fell to his knees, roaring soundlessly, as the flame poured into every part of him, erasing the boy, forging the fire-bearer. He wasn't holding it anymore. He was it. The brazier flickered, then dimmed, then went cold. Because the eternal flame was no longer chained to Olympus, it had chosen a new vessel. Irian collapsed beside the empty pedestal. Smoke rose from his fingertips, but his eyes glowed like dawn. He breathed, barely. But with each breath, A wisp of warmth spread outward, into the wind, down the mountain, toward the world below. He had taken the fire, but not for himself, for everyone. Arion did not walk down Olympus. He carried it with him. The moment the flame entered him, the mountain stopped resisting. Winds fell silent. The sky cleared. Even the stone beneath his feet seemed to shift and guide him, not with reverence but with recognition. He was no longer a trespasser. He was a torch. His body smouldered with divine heat, not the kind that scorched, but the kind that stirred life. Wherever his foot touched earth, frost melted. With every breath, the cursed wind softened. The air smelled not of smoke, but of renewal, of rebirth. But he was not whole. His limbs trembled beneath the weight of what he carried. The eternal flame was not just fire, it was memory. He could feel every spark it had ever ignited. The first campfire in a prehistoric cave, the torch that lit Athens, the forge that built Troy. And he felt the cost of all of it. He saw the cities burned in its name, the temples razed, the wars fought with stolen fire and ambition. The gift of the gods had never been innocent, but this time he would not give it as a weapon. He descended through cloud and silence, past broken statues of gods who had once been worshipped, now crumbling in divine decay. He passed the cave where Cerberus had once guarded the gate, but the beast was gone, as if even death had stepped aside for what Arion had become. He reached the world below, and there, in a frozen village where hearths had long turned to ash, people gathered around him, not in fear, but in awe. He did not speak. He simply held out his hand, and a flame danced from his fingertips into the nearest hearth. It roared to life. Then another, and another. A chorus of warmth spread from home to home, city to city, across lands that had forgotten what it felt like to gather around a fire without praying first. Arion burned. His hair shimmered like molten gold. His skin cracked like cooled obsidian. He was dying, but not fading. He was becoming something else. He had not stolen the flame. He had become it. And everywhere it burned, the world whispered his name, not in worship, but in gratitude. No tomb was ever built for Arion. No statue was carved. No songs were sung in temples. There was no procession, no mourning, no final battle to mark his passing. And yet, he never disappeared. After the fires returned, strange things began to happen across the land. In distant villages where no traveller had passed, hearths lit on their own. Entire forests, once frozen solid, blossomed overnight. Blacksmiths claimed their forges heated faster. Children, huddled in the cold, told their parents they saw a man of light standing beside the flame before it rose. No one could prove anything. But they all told the same story. He walked until there was nothing left of him to walk with. His body had long since cracked and burned, not from weakness, but from transformation. What remained of Arion, bone, blood, voice, had become spark, smoke, heat. And he gave it all away. His mother's forge was the last place touched. Old, abandoned, its fires cold for decades, until one night a traveller passing through claimed he saw a boy hammering something glowing white at the anvil. When he looked again, the forge was empty, but the flame danced high and hot, just like it used to. They say the gods felt it, that Olympus, sensing it had been stripped of its power, trembled in its silence. But the gods did not strike back. They did not rage. Because even they understood. Arion had not challenged them with war or pride. He had reminded them of purpose. And so the eternal flame, once hoarded by immortals, now flickered in every village, every city, every lonely mountain hut. It lived in the warmth of soup shared by strangers, in candles placed by grieving hands, in torches lifted by rebels seeking light in the darkest places. And always, always, they whispered the same name. Arion. Some say when your fire dims for no reason, it's him passing through. Others say if you listen closely to the crackle of the flame, you'll hear the rhythm of a hammer striking an anvil. Steady, patient, eternal. Because Arion never died. He became warmth itself. Not a god, not a hero, just a boy who gave up everything to help the world remember how to glow again. In the land of Sparta, where boys were taught to fight before they could speak, and honour was carved in bone, women were no less fierce. Among them was one whose name echoed through the marble halls like the clash of steel. Leonthe, daughter of Commander Adrastos. She was born during a blood-red eclipse, as omens howled over the city. Midwives whispered that she came from Ares himself. By age 12, she had bested her brothers in the wrestling ring. By 16, she had led a hunting party into the Taygetus Mountains and returned with 3 wild boars tied behind her chariot. Leonthe was not just respected, she was feared. She walked through the Spartan agora with a straight spine and quiet steps. Men lowered their eyes. Women watched her with a strange mix of envy and awe. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, and her words were chosen like arrows, never wasted. But there was something in her that few noticed. When she removed her armour at night, when the torches dimmed and the world outside fell away, Leonthe would stare at the stars, not with a warrior's challenge, but with wonder. There was a softness buried in her, one that battle could not scorch, a yearning, not for marriage, not for conquest, but for something else, something the Spartan code had no name for. Peace, magic, mystery. She never said. What she knew was this. Every full moon, when the city slowed and the warriors slept, her body pulled her toward the cliffs above the river Eurotas. She would leave behind her spear, her cuirass, her reputation, and become just a woman wandering beneath the stars. Alone. The world, she thought, must be bigger than Sparta, bigger than swords and pride. She felt it in her blood, like music she couldn't hear, but knew was playing somewhere. And then, one night, beneath a sky so silver it looked scraped from the edge of a blade, she saw it, gliding across a still pool in a hidden grove. A swan, unmoving, watching her, moonlight rippling on its back. Beautiful in a way no war song had ever been. And from that moment on, Leonthe's life began to shift, away from blood and battle, towards something softer, stranger, and far more dangerous. The grove was hidden, untouched by the usual grit of Spartan boots. Nestled between 2 cliffs, it whispered of something older than Sparta, older even than Olympus. The trees curved in crescent arches, their branches low and silvered by moonlight. A shallow lake lay at the centre, still as glass, and on it, the swan. Its feathers shimmered like woven starlight, neither white nor grey, but something in between. It floated with the silence of smoke, cutting across the water with no ripple. Its long neck arched gracefully, as if sculpted by divine hands, and its eyes, gods, its eyes, held no animal wildness, no fear, only awareness. Leonthe froze at the tree line. Her training screamed caution. Nothing in nature moved like this. No creature stood so boldly before a human. But the swan did not flee. It watched her, calmly, expectantly. She stepped forward. It tilted its head. Another step. Closer. The lake did not stir. She stood at the edge of the water, heartbeat steady but alert, hand resting lightly on the dagger strapped to her thigh. The swan moved again, slowly, deliberately, toward her. When it reached the edge of the shallows, it stopped and bowed its head slightly. Leonthe knelt. She had seen thousands of things in her life. War camps burning, bloodied warriors screaming at the heavens, newborn calves gasping for their first breath. But never had she seen something so quiet, so still, so enchanted. She reached out. The swan did not resist. Her fingertips brushed its feathers. warm, unnaturally warm, as though its body burned with sunlight instead of blood. A feeling stirred in her chest, not fear, not fascination, something older, something she didn't know she'd been missing until that very moment. Connection. The swan blinked once and turned away, gliding back into the centre of the lake. Leonthe remained kneeling, watching it, unsure what had just begun, but certain it was no accident. The next full moon, she returned. So did the swan, and again, the next month, and the next. No words, no promises, just presence, a ritual born of silence and gravity. By the time autumn settled on the hills, Leonthe no longer questioned why. She just knew the swan would be waiting, and her world would never be the same. Seasons turned, leaves reddened, fell, and grew again. The wars continued far below the hills, but in that moonlit grove, time stood still. Only the full moons mattered now. Only those nights. Leonthe had once measured her worth in battle scars, victories, and commands followed without hesitation. But now, something softer guided her. Something far older than Spartan law. Each month, she returned to the grove with offerings, fresh figs, soft linens, carved trinkets from olive wood. The swan never ate, never acknowledged the gifts. Yet Leonthe continued, drawn by an instinct she couldn't explain. The swan was always waiting. It met her at the edge of the water, dipped its head gently, then glided by her side. Sometimes it circled her. Sometimes it simply stood beside her on the shore, its warmth bleeding into the air around it like a hidden sun. She began to speak, not like a soldier, but like a woman who had never been heard before. She spoke of her father's coldness, of how victory never filled the empty space in her chest, of the nights she stared at the sky, wondering if there was more than sword and soil. The swan said nothing, but it listened. She could feel it. Its stillness wasn't silence. It was attention. The kind mortals never gave. The kind no commander, no suitor, no friend had ever offered her. Over time, she stopped feeling alone. She braided her hair before each visit, smoothed her robes, sat beside the swan for hours, shoulder touching wing, saying little, yet feeling more than she'd ever felt in a Spartan palace or battlefield. And still, the swan never fled, never aged, never changed. She should have been afraid. There were stories of gods taking animal form to lure mortals into ruin, stories of punishments for those who loved the divine. But Leonthe didn't believe in stories anymore. She believed in the way her hand fit perfectly along the curve of the swan's neck, in the way it bowed its head when she sang quietly into the night, in the way it seemed to wait for her, need her. No words, no promises. But in their silence, something ancient took root, and though she didn't speak the word, not even to herself, Leonthe knew what it was. Love. The swan was not born of earth. Its wings had once stretched across the sky. Its fingers had played the lyre that made the sun rise. Its name had once been whispered in temples, carved in marble, and shouted in song. Apollo, god of light, of music, of prophecy, now silent, feathered, bound. Long before Leonthe was born, Apollo had committed a sin in the eyes of Olympus. He had defied Zeus, not with blade or rebellion, but with truth. He had spoken against his father's punishments, against the cruelty passed down from throne to world, against the silence demanded by power. For this, Zeus did not kill him. He unmade him, a spell cast in fury, more curse than justice. Apollo was stripped of his form, his voice, his divinity, forced into the body of a swan, not to teach him humility, but to remind him he could glow like the sun and still be caged by shadow. The curse was crueler still. There was one condition. If a mortal ever discovered his true identity, the transformation would become permanent. And so Apollo waited. Years. centuries, lifetimes, floating on lakes, hiding beneath stars, watching mortals forget his temples, forget his hymns, watching the world grow colder as the gods withdrew, until Leonthe. Her presence cracked something inside him, something buried so deep even Olympus had forgotten it existed. Hope. He never meant to be seen, never meant to stay, but she returned, again and again, and her voice when she spoke to him in the glade, was the only thing that made the fire inside him flicker again. She was not a priestess, not a nymph, not a chosen oracle. She was a warrior with hands that knew only weapons, a woman hardened by loss and trained to feel nothing. And yet, she saw him. She treated him not as a symbol or a threat, but as something sacred, something worth waiting for. He dared not speak, dared not reveal his name. But in the tilt of his head, in the stillness of his body, he answered every question she never asked. And slowly, impossibly, he loved her back. In Sparta, solitude was respected, but not for too long. Leonthe's absence did not go unnoticed. Each full moon, she slipped away from the barracks, from the training fields, from the watchful eyes of commanders and kin. At first, none questioned her. She was Leonthe, untouchable, unshakable, the warrior whose loyalty was carved into every scar. But Sparta thrived on order, on discipline, and love, especially the hidden kind, was a foreign thing in a city built on control. Whispers began. She wanders. She speaks less in council. She trains, but her strikes lack venom. It was true. Leonthe had changed. Her movements were still sharp, but no longer cruel. Her voice no longer cut. And something in her eyes softened. Some nights she smiled to herself, as if holding a secret the gods themselves couldn't steal. Her father noticed first. Commander Adrastos, a man whose face bore no softness, whose daughters were meant to lead men, not follow feelings. He summoned her one evening, under the guise of strategy. But when the chamber emptied, he spoke plainly. "What keeps you from sleep?" Leonthe offered no answer. His voice darkened. "Do not forget who you are." But she already had, at least the version of herself that Sparta had moulded. What the city had built in stone, the swan had touched with water, and Leonthe found herself unwilling to return to who she'd been. Still, Sparta watched. A patrol once followed her out beyond the walls, tracing her steps toward the cliffs. They lost her near the olive groves. She was too skilled to be shadowed, but it was enough. Enough to birth suspicion. Priests murmured about omens, that the moonlight carried voices, that the lakes beyond Sparta stirred unnaturally, a warrior woman disappearing each full moon. They feared it was madness, or worse, a god. Leonthe knew the walls were closing in, that eyes were learning to look where before they had looked away, that her silence, once strength, now made her vulnerable. But still, she went. Still, she found him. And in that grove where moonlight touched feather, she forgot the noise of Sparta, forgot the rules, forgot the danger. Only one thing mattered now, not being seen, because if the world discovered what she knew in her heart, it would destroy them both. The moon was heavy that night, low, swollen, golden as a dying flame. Leonthe stood in her chamber, fingers trembling over her armour, unable to fasten the final clasp. Something had changed. She had felt it for days. A quiet trembling beneath her feet, like the ground itself knew what she did not. The swan had been different on their last meeting, restless, more watchful. Its feathers bristled when the wind shifted. It had circled her twice before settling at her side, its warmth sharp instead of soothing. That night, sleep eluded her, and when it came, it brought visions. She stood in a silver grove, her hands covered in gold dust. A statue loomed before her, part man, part swan, its wings frozen mid-beat, its face serene and lifeless. She reached out, called a name she didn't know she knew. Apollo. The statue cracked, and a voice echoed, not from the sky, but from inside her bones. Truth will freeze what love has kindled. She awoke breathless, heart racing, the name still burning on her tongue. She tried to dismiss it. A dream, nothing more. But warriors know when fear is real. And this was no ordinary omen. This was prophecy. The next day, Leonthe left Sparta earlier than usual, the ache in her chest sharper with every step. She didn't follow her usual path. Her feet led her deeper into the hills, through trees she'd never passed, into groves untouched by memory. There, hidden beneath a curtain of ivy and moss, she found the altar, ancient, cracked, marked with a single unmistakable inscription, carved in old flaking gold. Apollon. Her breath hitched. All at once the pieces fell into place. The warmth of the swan, its listening gaze, the dreams, the curse in her bones, the reason it had always come during the full moon. He wasn't just enchanted. He was a god. Her god. And she had broken something. She stumbled back, the sound of feathers behind her. The swan had followed her, silent, as always. But its stillness no longer comforted her. It was watching, sadly, softly, as if it already knew, as if the truth had arrived, and so had the end. The grove was no longer still. The air pulsed, slow and deep, like the breath of something ancient stirring in its sleep. Moonlight trembled on the surface of the lake. The trees leaned in, silent witnesses to the unravelling of a secret that had survived centuries. Leonthe stood frozen before the altar. The name, Apollo, still echoed in her mind like a spear striking stone. She turned, slowly, as if doing so would unmake the truth. But it was too late. The swan was there, not gliding, not graceful, just standing, watching. Its feathers no longer shimmered, its glow dimmed, flickering like a dying flame. Leonthe stepped toward it, her lips parted, unsure what to say, unsure if anything could be said. "I know," she whispered. The wind stilled. A single feather drifted from the swan's back, falling slowly, silently, before vanishing into dust the moment it touched the altar. And then the change began. The swan's neck arched, not in grace, but in agony. Its body trembled. Feathers unravelled into streams of gold and light, wings bent into arms, webbed feet split into toes that dug into the earth, and where the swan had stood, now knelt a man, naked, radiant, broken, Apollo. His hair shimmered like the sky at dawn. His skin glowed faintly, like embers beneath marble. But his eyes were dimmed by sorrow, by inevitability. Leonthe stepped back, hand to her mouth. She had loved him in silence, and now silence had become unbearable. He tried to speak, but the curse had not fully lifted. His voice cracked like thunder in a storm too old to name. "You weren't supposed to know," he said at last, voice barely more than wind. It was the only rule. She fell to her knees beside him, tears cutting down her warrior's face like rivers through mountain stone. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. He smiled then, just once, a god's smile. Not of joy, but of farewell. "I know." And with that, the ground beneath them shuddered. A soundless quake. A divine sentence passed without mercy. His glow faded. His skin hardened. His limbs stiffened mid-reach. Apollo was turning to stone, and Leonthe could only watch as love became legend. The moment the name was spoken, the curse began its final work. Apollo's body, once fluid with divinity, now stiffened inch by inch. The light beneath his skin dulled like cooling metal. His golden hair lost its luster, hardening into marble threads as the final phase of Zeus's punishment took hold. There would be no forgiveness, no reprieve. Leonthe grasped his hands, still warm, still trembling, but she could feel it, the stone creeping like frost over flesh. His fingers curled around hers one last time before they stopped moving altogether. She shook her head. No, this can't be how it ends. But the curse didn't listen. It had waited centuries in silence, patient and cruel. Apollo's chest rose once more, and then didn't. His wings, half-formed behind his shoulders, froze mid-fold. His knees, bent in grief, locked in place. His face, still beautiful, still kind, was caught between love and pain, his eyes open, but unseeing. And then, silence. A quiet deeper than any battlefield, deeper than the moments before the charge. This was not the silence of peace, but of loss, of something sacred shattered. Leonthe knelt there, forehead pressed to his now cold hand, a hand that once cradled stars, now nothing more than stone. Her tears slid down the side of his marble fingers and fell to the earth, one after another, slow and steady as a funeral march. The grove dimmed. Even the moon, so often bright and watchful, seemed to draw back behind a veil of cloud. No lightning came, no god appeared, because the punishment was done. Zeus had spoken, the swan had flown for the last time, and Apollo, god of light, was now a statue of silence, forever frozen in the moment of his final truth. Leonthe stayed long after the transformation finished, arms wrapped around what remained. She did not scream. She did not curse the heavens. There were no Spartans to hear her cries, no warriors to bear witness. Only the wind, only the trees, and the stone figure of a god who had once loved her, not with thunder and fire, but with stillness, and now with silence. Leonthe never returned to Sparta. She left her armour where it lay beside the altar, removed her sword, let her war-bound name drift away like smoke over the lake. The woman who had once stood tall among kings now knelt in silence beside a statue that would never move again. The grove became her world. Each full moon she returned, never missing a single one. She brought no offerings, no incense, no prayers, just herself, and a memory. She would sit beside the statue of Apollo, fingers brushing the cold stone hand she once held in flesh. Sometimes she spoke, sometimes she hummed a song he'd never heard, but somehow felt like it belonged to both of them. Other times, she simply watched the water and said nothing. The villagers began to whisper. They said a woman haunted the hills, that she wandered under moonlight with eyes like distant stars. Some said she had gone mad, others said she had been chosen, but no one dared disturb her. Years passed. Winters came and went. Empires shifted. Gods fell silent. But Leonthe remained. She grew older, but never frail. Her strength endured, less like a soldier, more like the roots of an olive tree clinging to the same patch of earth, year after year, storm after storm, and still the statue stood. Apollo, mid-kneel, wings half-formed behind him, gaze fixed on the space where Leonthe always sat. A moment frozen in marble, untouched by time. Some travellers claimed the stone was warm to the touch, that if you placed your hand against his chest, you could feel something faint, like a heartbeat from a dream. And then, one final full moon, Leonthe came. She sat beside him longer than usual, laid her head gently on his shoulder, and never moved again. When the villagers came weeks later, they found her there, peaceful, eyes closed, lips curled faintly in a smile. Beside her, Apollo's statue shimmered faintly, as if lit from within. No one touched it. They built no shrine, no temple. But the legend grew. And now, when the moon is full and the wind is still, some say the swan returns to the lake, not to be seen, but to remember. Melanion was not born under a palace roof or amidst temple incense. He came into the world beneath a willow tree during a storm that split the sky in two. His mother, a midwife's daughter, swaddled him in a linen wrap as thunder rolled over the hills. Birds scattered, the rain danced, and the child did not cry. He hummed. From the moment he could walk, music followed him. Streams whispered melodies when he knelt to drink. Leaves trembled in harmony as he passed. He didn't need instruction. Sound belonged to him. By 10, he could mimic any bird call and weave it into song. By 16, he played the lyre with such grace that even hardened warriors paused to listen. He sang of rivers, of lost brothers, of fields before war, songs that filled men's eyes with tears they didn't know they had. People called him a gift, a miracle, a child of divine breath. He never claimed it. Melanion travelled from village to village, sharing his music without coin or pride. His voice calmed fevers. His chords softened hardened hearts. He once played for a dying child who, upon hearing his lullaby, smiled and drifted into death as if it were a dream. But not all ears that listened were mortal. One spring evening, as he sat beside a glimmering river and strummed a tune about starlight, the very air around him changed. The wind slowed, the water stilled, even the frogs silenced their song. And then they arrived, the Muses. 9 of them, stepping lightly from behind the veil of the world. Cloaked in light and sound, each carried her own essence: history, tragedy, dance, epic, poetry, and more. Their eyes were not kind, not cruel, just knowing. They listened, and then, to Melanion's astonishment, they sang back. 9 voices in perfect harmony, older than language. Melanion closed his eyes, and without thought, joined them. His voice didn't echo theirs, it evolved them. When the last note fell into silence, even the stars seemed closer. One of the Muses, Calliope, eldest and most stern, touched his brow. "You are not ordinary," she said. "You are a vessel." And thus began the legend of Melanion, the bard whose voice would shake the heavens. From that night on, Melanion was no longer just a gifted mortal. He was touched, marked, whispered about. The Muses had chosen him. In the quiet folds of Mount Helicon, where few dared to tread, they invited him into their sacred circle. There, beneath ancient trees and skies unclouded by mortal ambition, Melanion learned not through lectures, but through experience. Calliope, muse of epic, taught him how to bend a story into sound. Clio whispered the histories of nations into his ears as he slept. Terpsichore danced barefoot through leaves while he played beside her, his fingers learning the rhythm of wind and body. Euterpe laid her flute across his palm and said only, "Listen." And he did. He absorbed, not just melodies, but truths. The kind that lived between words. The kind that mortals rarely noticed but felt. In the hush before a storm, in the ache of longing, in the gasp of a child at first snowfall. The Muses gave him not power, but perspective. And they asked for only one thing in return. Sing for them. Them, meaning mortals. The lost, the weary, the proud and broken. Those who needed to remember that beauty still existed, even in suffering. That song could be both balm and blade. At first, Melanion obeyed. He performed in city forums and quiet fields, played before kings and beggars alike. His songs stitched broken hearts, stirred revolutions, mended fathers to daughters, and enemies to uneasy peace. But as his gift grew, so did something else. Ambition. He began chasing sounds the Muses hadn't taught, notes no god had touched. In the stillest parts of the night, he would write alone, drafting fragments of something beyond language. A song that could bend time, still the wind, and bring tears to stone. A final song. He told no one, not even the Muses. because some part of him no longer wanted to share the divine. He wanted to surpass it. And the muses, ever watchful, saw the change. Not in his fingers, but in his eyes, the way he looked beyond them, as if destiny owed him more than admiration. And in the distance, fate stirred slightly, because no mortal walks beside the divine forever without cost. Melanion withdrew from the world. He left behind the applause, the requests, the gifts from kings and the adoration of cities. He stopped performing in public, stopped teaching students, even stopped speaking to the muses. Some claimed he had fallen ill. Others said he had died. But in truth, he had gone to the shadowed slopes of Mount Helicon, deeper than any mortal had ever gone, where only echoes of the old gods stirred. There, in a cave lined with crystals that sang when touched by light, he began composing the final song. It came to him in pieces, sometimes in sleep, sometimes in thunder, sometimes in silence so deep it frightened him. He didn't write it. He found it, like a secret hidden between the folds of reality. The melody refused to stay still. It changed when he breathed, twisted with his heartbeat. It was not a song for performance. It was truth in sound. He heard the birth of stars in its opening note. He felt the deaths of empires in its fall. It was not sad. It was not joyful. It simply was. He laboured for months, maybe years. Time bent strangely inside the cave. He ate little, slept only when the music allowed it. He would weep one moment, laugh the next, as though the song played through his soul instead of his hands. And when it was finished, the world changed. Birds stopped mid-flight. Trees leaned toward the windless mountain. Streams went quiet. The sky itself held its breath. And far above, in the marble chambers of Olympus, the gods turned their heads. Even the Fates, who never looked away from their weaving, paused. Clotho whispered, "A thread trembles." Lachesis frowned, and Atropos, whose shears never hesitated, set them down. They listened. The song did not demand worship. It did not beg to be loved. It simply revealed everything. When the final note faded, even the cave refused to echo it, as if the world knew to repeat it would be a crime. The gods waited. The muses waited. They expected Melanion to return, to offer this wonder to the world. But he didn't. He hid it. And in doing so, he set a different music in motion. One of silence. And consequences. When Melanion emerged from the cave, the world felt smaller. The skies, once so vast, seemed pale beside the echoes of the song still humming in his bones. People rushed to greet him. Musicians, poets, even priests. They begged to hear what he had written, to feel whatever power had moved the heavens. But Melanion said nothing. They asked again. He smiled faintly. Not yet. Only the muses saw the shift. They came to him one dusk, stepping from starlight like breath from a lyre. Their robes glowed with inspiration, but their eyes held warning. "You were chosen to carry beauty," said Erato, soft and sorrowful. "But beauty is not meant to be buried," added Cleo. "You must sing it," whispered Calliope. Melanion bowed his head. "I will not see it cheapened." They flinched, as if he'd struck them. "You think mortals unworthy?" Terpsichore asked, voice trembling. "You think you alone are its guardian?" He met their eyes, not with rage, but with something colder. Possession. "Yes." Silence fell like winter between them. "Then you are no longer ours," said Calliope, "not because you created something beyond us, but because you hoard it." He said nothing, and they vanished. Still, the gods waited. Even Zeus, who rarely concerned himself with mortal affairs, paused his thunder to listen. Even Hades tilted his head in the depths. They waited for a single note, a whisper, a fragment. Nothing came. Melanion kept the song locked inside himself. Not written, not recorded, not shared. He called it sacred, but sacred things, when sealed too long, begin to sour. He performed other pieces. They were still beautiful. Audiences wept. Crowds cheered. But he knew. And so did the divine. Something was missing. And worse, something had been stolen. The song that could stir the fates, bend time, and touch the gods themselves, was buried beneath his pride. He told himself he protected it. But the muses, watching from afar, saw the truth. He had chained the divine to his ego, and the gods, who endure madness, war, and worship without blinking, do not abide theft. And so, one night, the wind turned still. The stars went quiet, and a curse began to bloom. Not with fire, but with memory. The curse came softly. No thunder, no divine wrath from Olympus. Just a dream. Melanion lay beneath an open sky, cradled in the same silence he had once treasured. Sleep pulled him gently into darkness. And there, waiting, was the song. The final song. It returned, clearer, richer, impossibly perfect. He heard notes he'd never written, harmonies he hadn't yet imagined. It lifted him through stars, wove him into oceans, unspooled the very fabric of meaning. He wept in joy, in awe, in surrender. And then, morning. Gone. Not faded, erased. No memory, not a note, not a name. The melody he'd written with his soul, felt in his bones, was gone like mist at sunrise. At first, he thought it a cruel trick of sleep. He grabbed his lyre and tried to recall even a single progression. Nothing. He strummed wildly, off-key, frantic. Nothing. That night, he returned to his bed early, heart pounding, and the song returned, more radiant than ever. He sang along in the dream, tears streaming, fingers dancing through light. It felt real. He could remember it within the dream, but once again, with dawn's first breath, gone. Melanion began keeping candles lit through the night, scribbling notes in the dark. He begged his mind to retain a phrase, a rhythm, a single image. But no matter what he tried, it vanished. Again, and again, and again. He stopped playing, refused to perform. Crowds dwindled, friends left. His home grew dusty and cold. But none of it mattered. He had one obsession now. Remember the song. The muses stood at a distance, watching with sorrow. He was given a gift, said Euterpe, and he chose to cage it. Now he is the only one who will hear it, said Polyhymnia. And never remember, whispered Clio. It was not vengeance. It was balance. Melanion would hear the song every night, for eternity. But it would live only in dreams. Each sunrise it would slip through his grasp like water through cracked hands. He would never stop chasing it, never stop hoping. And in time, hope would rot into madness. Because what torments a bard more than forgetting the greatest song he ever knew, and knowing it still sings without him? Melanion stopped counting the nights. They bled into each other, an endless loop of ecstasy and loss. Each evening, he slipped into dreams where the final song embraced him like a lover returned from war. And each dawn he woke alone, screaming, weeping, blank. At first, he tried to outwit the curse. He hired scribes to sleep beside him, begged seers to extract fragments from his mind. He sang to mirrors, hoping his own voice would betray some hidden memory. Nothing worked. And slowly, he began to fray. He stopped eating. His robes hung from a body gone hollow. His fingers trembled when he reached for his lyre, the same instrument he once cradled like a child. Strings snapped under his shaking hands. He didn't fix them. He didn't need them anymore. Because in sleep, the music still came. It became his only purpose, the only place he felt whole. And waking became a punishment. He cursed the sun, smashed his windows, sealed himself in a room with no light. But still the song left with the morning. When he emerged, he no longer resembled a bard. He was wild-eyed, gaunt, his once golden voice now raw from nights of desperate humming. He wandered from village to village like a beggar, not for coin, but for memory. "Have you heard it?" he'd ask strangers. "The song with no beginning and no end? Have you heard it in your sleep?" People pitied him at first, then feared him. Some threw stones, others fled. He began to sing fragments in the streets, random frantic bursts of melody. They made no sense to others, but to him, they were clues, keys, pieces of a shattered mirror he could almost reassemble, but every time it slipped through his fingers. He laughed when he failed, then cried, then laughed again, and every night the song came back, shimmering, whole, just out of reach. The muses watched, not with anger, with mourning. He had once been their finest vessel. Now he was a cracked jar, overflowing only when no one could hear. And in that descent, the song he'd hoarded became the thing that unravelled him. Not with fire, not with wrath, but with silence. Melanion no longer lived in the world. His body walked through it, yes, but his mind was elsewhere, caught between dreams and daylight, past and present, a song only he could hear, and only when it was too late to hold. He wandered barefoot through cities that once hosted him like royalty. Children who once sat at his feet now ran from his shadow. His name, once sung in praise, became a warning. Don't end up like Melanion. He slept where he could, under trees, in empty chapels, sometimes in the doorways of inns whose keepers once begged for his presence. He no longer asked for food, only a place to rest, only the dream. The curse never failed. Each night he fell asleep with trembling hope, and the final song returned, whole, alive, a perfect ghost, and each morning he woke to forgetting. The cruelty wasn't in the silence, it was in the memory of sound. He remembered that he had heard something transcendent, that it had meant everything. But he could no longer remember why. He began speaking to shadows, to trees, to the stars. Sometimes he would sing to strangers, and demand they sing back, convinced the melody was hiding in someone else's throat. Once, he believed a child had hummed it in passing. He followed the family across 2 villages before collapsing in the dust, begging the boy to sing again. But the sound had been something else, something ordinary. He wept for hours, and still, each night, the song returned, taunting, embracing, divine. He tried to hum it as he dreamed, tried to wake mid-melody, but the curse was clever. He could not move within the dream. He could not record it, write it, carry it, only hear it. And when he woke, emptiness. Some who saw him said he still hummed in his sleep, that if you placed your ear near his mouth at midnight, you could hear a music unlike any other. But only then, only in darkness. The muses no longer came. The gods stopped watching. And Melanion, once the voice of the world, now wandered like an echo of a song the world could no longer remember, and he could no longer forget. Melanion had grown thin as twilight. His skin, once kissed by golden light, was now pale and paper-thin. His voice, what remained of it, was hoarse from years of whispers and wandering. He no longer searched for food, shelter, or even the song. He simply walked. One evening, he reached a cliff overlooking the sea. It was quiet there. No towns, no roads, no curious eyes, just the wind, the waves, and the stars slowly rising in the deepening blue. He sat, curled against a stone, the sea breeze tangling what remained of his hair. He didn't weep. He didn't sing. He simply closed his eyes, and the dream came again. But this time, something was different. There was no delay, no mist to wade through, no struggle to hear. The final song was there from the beginning, full and clear. But it was not just sound. It was a place, a presence, a world built from music. Melanion stood within it, barefoot on chords that bent like grass, stars pulsing above in rhythm. The sky was a symphony. The wind sang in harmony. And he was not just hearing it. He was part of it. His own voice joined the song, and it did not tremble. It did not forget. It soared. He saw every note he had lost, every phrase he'd mourned. But now he understood. The song had never left him. It had grown without him. It had become more than his hands could hold. He was not its owner. He was its witness. And in that final dream, there was no sorrow, no shame, no punishment, only release. When the sun rose, Melanion did not stir. The wind lifted softly around his body, as if carrying away a final breath. A shepherd passing the cliffs found him later, peaceful, hands resting on his chest, as if cradling an invisible lyre. There was no scroll, no recording. But above him, high in the coastal sky, seabirds flew in strange formations, almost like they danced to something only they could hear. And the sea, for a moment, sang. Not in words, not in melody, but in something older than either. Something he had finally become. Melanion was buried beneath a lone olive tree near the cliff where he last slept. No priest performed the rites, no crowds gathered, just the shepherd who found him, and a few villagers who remembered the stories, faint echoes of the bard who once made the gods pause mid-breath. There was no monument, only silence. But silence has a way of amplifying truth. In the years that followed, strange things were whispered across the land. Travellers claimed that if you passed that cliff under a new moon, you might hear a melody in the wind, brief, fleeting, heartbreakingly beautiful. Not a full song, just a note, just enough to make you stop. Children began dreaming of music they'd never heard. Musicians would wake in the night with tears on their cheeks and no memory of why. And sometimes, when a bard sat alone at dusk with no audience, a sudden chord would form beneath their fingers, something not theirs, something perfect. They never remembered it by morning. The muses said nothing. They did not curse another bard. They did not reclaim the song, because they understood what Melanion had become. Not a warning, not a hero, but a vessel turned legend. A soul whose punishment was born not of cruelty, but of refusal, and whose redemption came not through sharing, but surrender. The final song was never written down. It was never performed in amphitheatres or temples. It does not exist in scroll or scripture, but it lives. In the quiet moments between sleep and waking, in the hush before a performer strums their first chord, in the way the sea sounds different when you're grieving. Melanion's song became part of the world itself, not to be remembered, but to be felt. A whisper in the bones, a melody without words, and those who feel it, even for a moment, never forget the silence that follows. They say, if you stand alone on the right cliff, on the right night, with no one watching, and the wind is kind, you might hear a sound that doesn't belong to this world. Just a fragment, just a breath. And maybe, if you listen closely enough, you'll finally understand why Melanion never let it go.